Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's IIFX live podcast, Why Sports and Entertainment Venues Need to Prepare for the Weather. Our objective today is to learn how sports and entertainment leaders prepare their venues and staff to protect the fans and staff during adverse weather conditions. I'd like to first introduce Jim Mercurio, my cohort on these podcasts. Jim, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Lou. Thanks so much. I certainly appreciate the time today. Some interesting topics, a couple of our favorites in the business. If you give me a moment, I'll introduce them.
Sure.
We'll start off with Tom Bedard, Senior Manager of Emergency Operations. Tom, welcome and thank you for being here. And certainly one of the old-time favorites, personal of mine as well, but Russ Simons, he calls himself the Chief Listening Officer of Venue Solutions Group. But one of the best in the business and a personal friend. So good. Thank you so much for being here, Russ and Tom. I appreciate you being here as well. And I'd like to kick it off to you, Russ, to kind of kick this conversation over of what we need to be doing in these venues, especially as it relates to weather.
Hey, thanks, Jim and Lou. I'm really grateful for Tom to join us today. This is not a new subject to public assembly facility operators. I mean, many operators in arenas, complexes, convention centers, and others maybe haven't paid as much attention in the past because of the covered and nature of their facilities. But due to the changing nature of the weather that we're experiencing and what happens both approach, arrival, and exit, it's something that I think is really important for everybody to be paying more and more attention to and to prepare for. We have a couple of videos that we want to just show to give some examples of some of the things that we're facing in extreme weather right now. And so we're going to go ahead and play those, and then we'll come back and talk about them.
Yeah.
Holy cow was the thing I get out of that, right? I mean, when you think about some of the comments of people, they think it's a little bit of a joke until they start to realize that it's no longer, you know?
Well, it is the intensity of the storm. And I'm guessing that probably came on pretty suddenly, maybe not for the stadium operators, but for the people sitting in the stands. And also that video and the one we're about to see in front of us shows the challenges and the amount of space in a concourse and the amount of protective area. I think it's we take some license on saying, well, we'll just send people to their cars or we'll do a lot of these other things. And at the end of the day, we're going to talk a little bit more about how much real time we have to deal with these things, and that we can't be cavalier in terms of how what we're doing to protect our fans and or our staff and employees. So let's go ahead and play this video. So in that, we illustrate the nature of many of our buildings that create canyons and focus and emphasize the wind. And I know that you all feel like I felt when I saw that fella get taken out by the Rubbermaid 56-gallon square top trash can,
Right.
and it just thinking, wow, I'm glad that wasn't me, and I'm sorry it happened to anybody. But it illustrates the intensity of what we're facing overall. And one last piece. the thing about this is it's illustrative of a couple of situations that have happened in our business over the last several years. This one shows from the University of Iowa Stadium with the funnel cloud in proximity. This has happened on a number of occasions, and one of the main things that I'm going to want to talk about today is really the changing nature of storms and the changing nature of storms intensity and speed. And just using this picture as an illustration, the standard in our business is that if there's a lightning strike within a certain distance, and I don't think it varies too much by league, but it does vary in recreational environments and that type of thing. But for instance, if there's a lightning strike within, let's say, 12 miles or 8 miles, depending on the rules that you're going for, if that storm that we're looking at right here is moving at 35 plus, easily 35 to 50 miles per hour, and that's when you call your shutdown of your event, or you're evacuating people to either hold in place or move to the parking areas, there's not going to be enough time to do it. It is illustrative of that. Weather is changing, and I don't want to get into a political argument over climate change, global warming or climate change and all of that. All you have to do is take the empirical nature of what's happened in the last several years and apply that to where we are in sports and entertainment. We have a situation where we have a whole new vernacular now in recent periods of what's happening. At SoFi Stadium, for example, we did not install a Franklin Lightning protection system. We did ground the steel structure, but early on in that project, when we made that decision, we were a little bit cavalier about, well, we don't see lightning in the Southern California region or in the LA basin.
Right.
Well, all well and good, except we were wrong, because 4.5 or 5 years later, we absolutely experienced those conditions, and those conditions are now repeating year after year. So there's just like so much going on here that we can't afford to be cavalier about it. I think as public assembly facility operators, we tend to do what we've always done until someone can convince us, or circumstances or risk convinces us we have to do something different. And so it's abundantly clear to me, and I think everyone on this call and many of the people who are addressing this topic overall, that we need a different level of preparedness. We need a different level of being ready to be able to manage our guests and our employees. And so with that, I'd really like to talk to Tom a little bit about, is it just me? Am I Chicken Little, or is the weather world changing?
Russ, I would never call you Chicken Little. One, because I don't think Chicken Little had such a nice beard or goatee. The weather world is changing. We're observing some trends, but when we talk about climate change, the trends we're most observing are heavy rain events becoming heavier and high temperatures increasing, with heat waves and general average temperatures increasing. From the public assembly operator perspective, what I think they might be seeing is these weather events being captured and broadcasted a lot more. We all might go home at the end of the day and scroll on TikTok or Instagram and see last night's weather disaster pop up on there. So it looks, one, like these events are happening more frequently. In some cases they are, but I think what underpins all of this is, as we talk about weather preparedness, it's a good risk assessment, looking at a 10 or 20 year period of time so you know what your area is predisposed to, and then making decisions based on that. You can't go by the seat of your pants with weather anymore. One, because it's going to be very visible if you make a misstep. And two, because it's getting a little bit more severe out there and harder to handle, especially when you've got an exposed population.
I also think, Russ, if I can jump in for a minute, it used to be such that weather was used as a means of protecting the field. For example, we got to put the tarps out, we got to do this sorts of things, right? What we're seeing now is that there's so much stuff that's happening outside the stadium now, in the parking lots, at the gates, different structures that are being erected, signage that's being placed in there, in many cases temporary in nature. it's that sort of thing that I think people haven't been paying it. Maybe assembly operators haven't been paying attention to as often. I can recall we had an event here in San Francisco and Santa Clara where some of the structures we had were how we wanted to have line formations and had people going through these temporary structures that we built. And we lost a couple of them based on the sales that we created by putting up some of these banners, right? So though we have weather apps, though we have these things that we're tracking storms of such, I don't know that the plans are as developed as they need to be in terms of not only for your fans but for your employees. And maybe Tom or Russ, you can talk a little bit more about that on what we should be doing, what we should be seeing in terms of that, and no longer having our head in the sand, so to speak, that, oh, it's just a heavier rain, or it's just a little hotter weather, or it's, something that we looked at what they had to do in the playoffs for the Buffalo game, where they got, inches and feet of snow that before the game, things of that nature. They had to deal with that in the past, but, maybe talk a little bit about it so that, we get a little bit more awareness.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
What wind speed do you think that tunnel that you created in the sales, what wind speed do you think that went at?
So it was rated at 80, I think it was at 85 miles an hour. So we got gusts of about 60. So they say, but that's what they were rated at when we looked at, some of the engineering that we had placed in there. But yeah, it was pretty significant weather event for sure.
What you just said there was perfect because you knew the number and then you knew it came from the engineering study. From decades spent in meteorology in a private weather company, the best venue operators and the best public assembly operators were those that knew their numbers, had those engineering studies still with them, and built their plan to the number. So Russ, I know you've got a response here in a second, but I wanted to put a pin in that because Jim, I thought that was really excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, Jim, you brought up Buffalo, and to me, it's a perfect illustration about, and I will continue to harp on. It's not just our guests, but it's also our employees.
100%.
The Kansas City Buffalo game was an extreme event in so many different ways, but the consequences of that have come due and have become public more recently. That there were a number, and I think the number is at least 5, but it could have been more, of Kansas City fans who, when they got back to Kansas City, literally had parts of their body amputated due to frostbite. Now, I mean, again, I'm not trying to be sensational here or something like that, but just whether it's the enthusiasm for the team or how people like to experience, and we've all laughed at the guys in Green Bay with their shirts off and sub-zero weather and that type of thing. But that was the most extreme event with real life consequences. And one of the things that I've opined on in some of my private writings is that, we have been, I feel like public assembly facility operators are a lot like school teachers, meaning we end up taking on more and more responsibility that are far away from what our core mission is. And in many cases, we have the responsibility to keep those in our care safe. So I'm wondering at some point in the future, if this is going to come back to us from a risk standpoint legally, saying, hey, you allowed these folks to be in this environment, without proper clothing. I mean, nothing would surprise me in today's world. And while I can't control, nor am I suggesting at this point that we can, what happens with our guests, what happens with our staff? I mean, how prepared are we? What were those workers like? What did we provide those workers? Whether it's hats and gloves and this actually fits into extreme heat as well as the extreme cold that we're talking about. It's funny. When I was thinking about how to talk about this, I was thinking about when we first went to security and we were doing hand wanding, and we had all these people. We stuck them out there with hand wands in an effort to try to elevate our security profile, but we didn't really think about the person. we put those people in those positions and we didn't give them regular breaks. We didn't provide them with water. And then we were shocked when the actual quality of the wanding operation from a security standpoint sort of drifted off in the last 30 minutes when we had the most people actually coming into the building. It's like, I'm just shocked by this, and so whether it's extreme heat, whether it's cold, or whether it's what happens with, something pops up with one of those extreme rainstorms and that type of thing, I'm convinced that we're not planning for our people. I'm convinced that we're not planning for our guests. And I wonder what this is going to cause from us going forward.
Well, I think there's two things with that. One, we used to say that, hey, it didn't matter what the emergency potentially was, the response was going to be relatively the same. Well, that's not so much true anymore. I mean, I think that's where when you look at weather. So, for example, what I meant by that was if there is in my side of the world, if there's an earthquake, we're going to have to be as self-sufficient, I think, as possible, because the resources that are not going to be able to come to us because they're moving to the rest of the city would be similar in nature if there was a weather event, right? Because there's other things and other accidents and other places where people would have to go. So that's where I've changed my thought process a little bit. And I wonder, Tom, if you can shine a little bit more light on some of the preparedness things that you do or suggest that you do insofar as discussing weather. Again, not just from 70,000 people in your building, but the 3,000 other people that Russ talked about that are employed by us, and what our expectations of them are during those types of events, reassembly areas, things of that nature, right?
Jim, I think your example there of the earthquake is a great example of coordinating and the importance of coordinating with local public safety officials. I'm sure it's something that the listeners are already doing, but talking with your local emergency management office is going to be the best way for them to tell you what your responsibility is going to be during one of these events. Because if you've got a major earthquake, you've got a stadium, they're going to be looking towards you potentially as a place that they could set up a long-term shelter. They might be looking at some of your staffing abilities to help supplement what they've got. Depending on whatever the local plan is, they might have other needs for you. And so when it comes to preparing for really big events that you can't really anticipate or prepare for effectively, meeting with those local officials is the best way to know what specific things you can do to prepare beyond making sure that your staff have things with them. If it's going to be a bad day, if we're expecting severe weather, a lot of flooding, or other severe weather conditions, making sure that they've got equipment with them in their vehicles to stay. And one story comes to mind with a venue in Colorado that's pretty exposed to weather. They were forecasting a big snowstorm, and they had the snowstorm hit at the end of their outdoor event. And the staff were able to help the guests get off the mountain, kind of a narrow pathway to get off. But then a lot of those staff were snowed in up there. And so talking about preparedness for a wintertime event, it would be great. And I'm sure that this is what they did at the time to tell the staff, hey, we've got big snow. There's a chance you may not get home. Bring what you need. These are our accommodations here. So I would recommend, if you've got a big event, talk with your staff, and all of their circumstances, have good, tight coordinations with local public safety.
Well, Tom, how should the fan prepare themselves for the weather too? The fan himself, herself.
Lou, that is a great question, because the example coming up of individuals having heat stress at concerts is one example. We see some where the event operator has issued a protective action like evacuate or get in shelter, and you find that guests may not do that. I think the most important thing is rock solid risk management, having good conversations with your legal team, but also ahead of the event, communicating with guests to let them know what they might need to do. Oftentimes this is heat, and telling them to drink water ahead of time. What comes to mind immediately is, one, yes, the Kansas City Chiefs and frostbite, telling fans potentially get ready for record low temperatures. But I'm thinking of Houston late last year with the Snoop Dogg concert. A lot of medical evacuations from that, transporting to the hospital from extreme heat, because Houston had a multi-day heat wave where the overnight low didn't get cool enough to actually let your body recover. Not knowing fully what happened in that case, if you are a public assembly facility operator or somebody who's got crowds in extreme heat or extreme cold, getting those marketing messages out there early may help. Lou, I'd be kind of curious, what thoughts do you have on all this?
I'm sorry.
So what thoughts do you have with fans and how they should
Well,
be?
I do. I think they have a certain responsibility as well. And
Yeah,
I think with all the resources that are given to us today compared to the past, whether it's a weather app, local news, local weather, uh, should be take this responsibility on as a part of the team to get through this extreme weather situation, etc. So I think they owe a responsibility to themselves and to us too to prepare themselves, dress properly. As far as being knowledgeable of all the surroundings relative to the weather, and of course we give them a lot of information. We have game apps. We have so much materials we can give them to make their life smoother in a situation like this. So I want to say that the fan shares in this a little bit too. And Russ, am I right?
Well,
Or Jim?
I
yeah.
mentioned I mentioned earlier that we have better, and this tracks with everybody's agreeing on here, that we have better information longer. And I don't know that we've really been thinking about using all the tools we have to actually prepare the fans. We have lots of data, we have lots of communication with them, where we have social media communication and that type of thing. So, we have much longer lead times to be able to say, hey, by the way, we're going to be in a heat bloom, or I think maybe just invented that word, but you get my saying. So here are the things that you need to be cautious of, and it's not just, hey, make sure you hydrate. Hey, make sure you're drinking a bottle of water an hour, because the combination of heat and humidity or lack of humidity, depending on the conditions, that's going to have different effects on the body overall. And then we can also prepare ourselves internally of making sure that we have the amount of resources. If I was in San Antonio last year, and I think it was 115 degrees, and I usually save 115 degrees for Phoenix and for Las Vegas, right? So being in San Antonio at 115 degrees, I was just like, holy Toledo. And then, but that kicks on in my head, and I know that I have to be drinking at least 12 ounces of water per hour, and I need to not go outside. I need to maintain and being cool, because heat affects me differently now at my extended age than it did when I was invulnerable to anything that would happen to me externally. And when you add on that the extremes, then we've got real problems. We've got real health problems for people if we're not paying attention. And some of those last for days and days later, and dehydration, kidney issues, all of this stuff that we've all been like, whoa, what's going on here? So I think we have to actually employ the platforms and the resources we have to educate our guests and our employees well in advance if they're coming into an extreme heat or cold situation.
We had a perfect example of that. Moving from San Francisco to Santa Clara, the heat index was significant in terms of where the stadium was built versus what people were used to at Candlestick, right? And so we started to get some slack about it, about, gosh, it's hotter over there in Santa Clara. It's much difficult to sit in the stands than it was. And so we started to take it upon ourselves on what could we do. And there were sunscreen stations that we installed throughout the entire building, for example, right? Then it became, we can't do it all for 70,000 people. So what we need to do is start communicating to our fans. And what we said was, just like when you go to the beach, you come prepared. You bring your towels, you bring your sunscreen, you bring your bottled water, whatever. The last thing we did strategically was to look at certain times when the weather was, and I don't know if it was above 90 degrees or whatever we decided. I can't remember at the time, but we made a conscious decision to lower pricing on water. And so we partnered with our food and beverage company to make sure that we brought in additional water for that and sold it for a much less price. I think it was $2 a bottle, when these things are going for $6 a bottle nowadays, if not more. But we took that into consideration as a means to hydrate people and to not, put people in a position to where they were unsafe. And so, yes, we took a little bit of a hit on maybe some revenue, but we were able to protect our fans from getting into areas and certain unsafe situations. So that might be a scenario that you look or think about, in your business and operational planning on how to take care of your fans. But the key here was really communicating in advance. There was press releases, there was interviews, there were social media hits. There was all these things to remind people that, hey, you're coming to the game on Sunday, dress in layers because it's going to be hot. It could get colder in the layer later in the afternoon or something. So those are all, I think, things that are important to recognize.
So for operators, I'd like to ask Tom, what's your advice? I guess I'm interested in what they should be doing. Where should they be getting their information from? I mean, there's the National Weather Service and there's AccuWeather. There's lots of different things, but what's the combination of either national or local, or how should facility operators, where should they be getting their information from?
Three answers, and they're short. The first one is a meteorologist every time, and actually make sure they have a meteorology degree and you're not talking to somebody who's a weather enthusiast. That's pretty pervasive.
I mean, somebody with a bunion? What are we talking? Yeah.
Okay. National Weather Service is a public service. They're a public organization, federal government. They're there to support you, but they're not going to be the people. They're going to be with you for small concerts, big concerts, conferences, state fairs. They'll deploy with local emergency management, but they're not a private company, so they're not going to go out of their way to support you, much like you wouldn't want your tax dollars going out to support a concert out there if you're not going to be participating in it. But the Weather Service can help you from a planning perspective, get you in touch with the right things, and be your local weather experts that you don't need to pay a consulting fee for. The final answer is if you're doing live event operations or anything where you've got a lot of exposure, get a private weather company. That is universally the guidance out there. Weather Service is out for the general public. If you're going to have a meteorologist embedded within your operations, which is the best thing to do, look at your companies like AccuWeather, like DTN, like AccuWeather and DTN are the two that come to mind off the top of my head because those are the two biggest ones.
Sure.
AccuWeather. But the answer is always a meteorologist, and then a private sector will be able to provide the best support, Russ.
So it sounds like you're recommending, sort of concentric rings to me on the broad-based National Weather Service, the next level down, your private weather. But is it important to have a relationship like with your local weather person? That like the National Weather Service is looking at this stuff globally. Your private weather service, they're looking at it also globally, but also not in your market. Would you advise a relationship with your local meteorologist who actually knows sort of some of the quirks and details that happens in your sort of area of operation?
Oddly enough, I wouldn't recommend it. So your local National Weather Service office is going to know the quirks. We've got 122 or 120 something of them across the U.S. The reason I don't recommend broadcast meteorologists, and weather Twitter, don't be too angry with me, is that they may not totally know how to do live event support as well as meteorologists on a warning desk or a private sector meteorologist. You also need to make sure they're going to be dedicated to you. So having local TV up and waiting for them to mention you isn't a reliable solution. And if you're on a text basis with your local TV meteorologist, they may go out and go on a run for an hour or two when you're at peak operations. Your local TV Met might be awesome. You can always give them a try as a resource, but I would never look at them as a replacement for paying for something or a replacement for the expertise of the National Weather Service.
I actually really appreciate that comment because I factually know that a lot of people do rely more heavily on their local weatherman and maybe a sponsorship relationship with a media resource, whether it be radio or TV. And I think your comment is a really important one to take on board, that and no matter what, it's a combination of things. And you want to make sure, as in everything else we do in our business, we want the right level of expertise to prepare us to meet our obligations on behalf of our guests.
Now, as you say that, might have local media who've got a relationship, like they're doing they sponsored the event, and so they'll tell you that a meteorologist is going to be there. If you're listening to this and that's something that you've got going on, it might not be the end of the world. Just make sure they're actually going to be dedicated to you, and that if there's a major political event or major terrorist attack somewhere, that they can't get pulled away to go do live feeds for that. They need to be looking at radar, they need to be looking at the sky, and they need to be dedicated to you for as long as you've got exposure.
Very good.
I got to believe that the liability play of hiring somebody on the professional level could be of assistance after an event, right? After an event that takes place, there's got to be some comfort there that says, look, we might not be able to control everything, but from an operator's perspective, here are some of the steps that we took, not only for our employees, but for our guests, inclusive of a meteorologist that we hired that gave us this information that helped us form the plan that we created. Would you agree?
Yeah, a good local example of this, or a recent example. So if you look at the Red Rocks hailstorm last summer, some text messages have come out about it. Oh, by the way, if you're doing any live event support, weather related safety actions, document it so that you can show something good when they do an information request. What you saw out of the text messages was they're talking back and forth with their Skyview meteorologists. I don't know a lot about that company, but what as a potential Red Rocks guest told me was they've got a private weather vendor. An event happened, but they at least thought through it enough to get that vendor. So from a brand and PR perspective, it's helpful. But
Sure.
Jim, from a liability perspective, lawyers would know better, but I imagine it would be helpful.
Yeah. 100%. There's two fronts on that, right? The liability side, the legal side, the protection side. The other piece, just as you stated, was, hey, I do appreciate that the operator paid attention to that level of detail, to Russ's, point where you're in the custody of my care. So I think there is a message there that is worth repeating, that it's all about making people feel and actually be safe, but feeling safe and comfortable while they're in the custody of our care, as our good friend Russ would say.
Well, let me throw a question out to everyone here. Considering what I'm hearing today, as we look at evacuation, whether it's shelter in place or full evacuation, do you see any changes that we need to be thinking about as event operators that are different than we did, say, 5 years ago? Russ, maybe I'll start with you. You see any?
I think we need to get away from this concept of, well, we'll just do this. We'll just send them to their cars. Well, most of us have noticed how rideshare and public transportation have factored into. I was just fortunate enough to be a part of the opening of the KC Current Stadium. That stadium seats 11,500 people. 7,000 of those people, approximately 7,000 of those people, came on a shuttle system. So you can't just send them to their cars, right? And then I don't know what percentage of people might have come in ride share and that type of thing. And so it's like I don't think there's any part of our business today that we can be cavalier about. When I hear the word they, or I hear the word just, or that, I'm just like, my radar goes up. It's like, like, let's talk about the science of this. Like emotionally, it's like, well, we're just going to do this, or we'll just tell them to go do that. Well, I got to tell you, that should be burning red flags, across the country, to say, if we're going to suggest something, if we're going to recommend something, that actually happened while I was there. Thank you, Chris. If we're going to recommend something, then we damn well better know that we can execute it on behalf of our guests and our staff. So I just think we have to take this entire conversation much more seriously than we ever had in the past. Now, look,
Russ, are you saying that, sorry to interrupt you, but are you saying that even to the point where design
100%
changes? Yeah. And I think because that's where I think architects have got to start paying a little bit more attention to this, because you say it all the time, right? Where, we've got these concourses that are covered, but yet technically aren't designed to handle 70,000 people per se,
Sure.
but because we're looking at flow rates, right? And it's people per minute sort of thing. You're not looking at overall capacity, I don't think, right? In the design
Right.
of these buildings. Yeah.
Well, and listen, there's a little bit of survival of the fittest here. So, I actually, I got scared to death once when my kids were at a soccer game where we didn't have any information, and a lightning storm came on us fast with lightning strikes in proximity. And then it's like, holy Toledo, like my responsibility to my kids or the kids I was coaching or any of that stuff. So and as I started this conversation, I think the speed and intensities, I feel like the speed and intensity of these storms are changing. So from a survival of the fittest standpoint, if you listen to this and your awareness is higher and you start to, whether it's your social media or the feeds you get or what you hear from the stadium, get out first, like, get deep in the area of refuge first, whether that's a public assembly facility, an airport, or whatever happens. Like at the end of the day, take responsibility for taking care of you and yours.
But Russ, we still have this public. I laugh at this because we experienced this even at the IIFX conference in June, I think it was, and the fire alarms went off. And here we are, all of these assembly managers and people just sit there and we look at each other like, hey, should we get out of here or not? How do you combat that? I mean, it's true, right? We're sitting here thinking, is it just me, or should we be an example of getting out of this room, be first? There's still this stigma, it seems, that you don't want to be that the person that's over causing panic or
Overreacting. Yeah.
What's the reason we just sat there, right?
I don't know. That's human
right?
error. Human error.
Right. Well,
that's why
I guess
that's why they have the Darwin Awards, right? So,
Is there any reason? Yeah, Tom, is there any reason why,
I was listening to an audiobook recently that talks about why folks don't take tornado shelter and how you can break down who's going to be more likely to shelter based on their place in a community. They found that those who maybe are a member of a religious community, hear their community talking about the weather event, potentially sheltering and doing some protective action are more likely to. So we look around at those around us to take protective actions. Jim, you're right. We don't want to be the goofy one that's running away because we're scared of it. Right. But it takes some look at what's going on with the group dynamic. If you've got a group that's respecting the weather safety action that you've asked them to take, then they're likely all going to follow it. I mean, in these events, we are just 1 in a million people. So it is about building that culture, making sure that you've got front of house staff that are well-versed, can answer good questions, and be competent on the fly. And I know there's a lot of churn in that role, so you've got to keep them well-trained, but lead the group from that front of house side. Lead them, and then as you're in those situations where you can be the first one to start the safety action, start the safety action. You may be the first one who needs to, and then the second key leader will follow you, and then you've got everything coming through. But this is a really lively conversation, whether right now, and Jim, to pick up on your resilient design note, looking at the Indian Lakes, Ohio tornado last Thursday night, that's reawakened this whole conversation in weather about building tornado resilient design so that our facilities stop being completely destroyed every time an EF2 or EF3 tornado comes through. That's maybe too future leaning, but I'm excited for architecture to keep up.
No, I don't know that it is. I think the message needs to be heard, and the bell is being rung. If not by Russ and others. I absolutely think that. I think I'll leave it with, regardless of the incident, it feels like the 80-10-10 rule applies, which is 10% are going to panic, 80% are going to lead, and 80% are going to, or 10% are going to panic and go crazy, right? 10% are going to lead, the 80 are going to follow. And I think if that's kind of true, then if you're listening, I think the message is try to be the leader, right? I think there it is. This is precisely what I use. This clip that Chris is showing is the Seinfeld clip with George is trying to get out of a fire, and he's in a, for those that don't see it, he's in a retirement facility, and he just tramples over everybody who are in wheelchairs and walkers and to get out. And it was, but that's exactly the type of behavior that happens in these sorts of these sorts of events. Maybe not what you saw on the clip in the Chicago Cubs, because people were just quietly kind of moving on, and I don't think they felt that they were as in danger as they might have been until they are, and then at that point in time, it's too late. So if that's the message of the day, get out early, be the first guy or gal to get out. Well, that's awesome.
I guess, Jim, you just led me to what are maybe one or two takeaways from each of you as we leave this tremendous podcast here. Russ, you have one or two recommendations, everybody?
Yeah, my first is increase your awareness.
Yeah.
There's lots of information out there. There's lots of trusted sources. Increase your awareness. I would say the second piece is to make sure that you don't get sort of you don't just buy into the way everything was in the past. Like, tornadoes happen in Tornado Alley. They don't happen here. It doesn't lightning in LA. We don't have extreme things in New England, whatever that is, because that's changing so rapidly, it's hard to keep up with. The good news is your first call ought to be to your peers in those other areas that have regularly had those things happen, to be able to say, how should I prepare now that this has to be a part of my risk management?
Yeah. Thank you. Tom?
My first recommendation is have a weather vendor and start with the National Weather Service.
Okay.
They're able to reach out and email you. So email them, Google National Weather Service in your city. You'll find your local office. There's probably one a county or two away. Email them, tell them who you are. They'll help, and they'll be able to point you towards resources to find a private weather vendor for your pinch hitter that you'll need during the event day. And my second recommendation is to make sure you're de-incentivizing people from not listening to protective actions. If you have folks that are queued up in front of an event, you've got a storm goes through, you need to go into lightning safety precautions, make sure you've removed every possible incentive for them to stay behind. Those are my two, Lou.
Yeah, this is excellent. Jimmy?
Yeah, listen, I think I'll choose the words of my wife to the grandkids just recently when she pointed to them and said, "Don't be afraid to be the stinky cheese that stands alone." And what she was telling them was, hey, listen, it may not be popular. It may not be what everybody else is doing, but be the leader. And I think if you're in the position of an assembly manager, be that leader and recognize that things are in fact on the cusp. They are changing, and don't be afraid to be the stinky cheese that stands alone in it, even when and if it's not popular. The second piece I would say is, this is a little self-serving for you and I guess, and the IIFX team, but come join us in celebrating what we're trying to do here in elevating the fan experience, and maybe perhaps provide some type of opportunities for us to engage with you and your companies to help you in some of these regards. We got this consortium that we're looking at, Lou, that we could potentially make this as an opportunity to help you in that regard, to pair people that are in the business that have experienced this stuff before and might be able to bring them to a local Starbucks near you, I guess, Russ. But I guess the point being to use things and groups and people and founders of the IIFX in your favor to be resources to you.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm going to leave a couple of two along the way here. I think what I learned today too is always evaluate your policies. Nothing's stationary, nothing. So evaluate your policies. Certainly training and planning and then training. If you accomplish those and can stay on top of your game, I think you've done everything you could do to protect those fans that are coming, right? And that's our obligation, as Russ said. So I think we've had a good session here today. Jim, what you thinking?
Yeah, listen, I just wanted to say thank you to both you and Russ and Tom, for your insights for this. Sometimes this can be a little dry, pardon the pun, I guess, but it wasn't. This is stuff that you make it feel and seem graspable, right? This is things that people need to really kind of hunker in on and understand. And you certainly you put a difficult situation on the map, and hopefully something that people will take away from this. So once again, I appreciate both of you. Russ, it's always good to see you. Tom, I look forward to working with you in the future on some things. But once again, thanks for your time and effort today. And
I
we
wish
wish you all the best.
I
Yeah, I
wish
wish
it
it
was
was colder.
colder. But listen, this event here will be live on YouTube here pretty soon. Chris will do the auditing, actually did the editing, I should say, and get that on YouTube as well. So listen, on behalf of all of us here at IIFX, thank you for listening, and thank you everyone on the program here today. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.